What do you appreciate the most about your mother? Story 1. There are some things she kept to herself for years so that I could formulate my own opinion on them. Even when she saw me saying things she didn't agree with, she trusted me to eventually understand without her pushing her opinions on me. For instance, I spent years thinking the sun shines out of my dad's ass, even though he was mostly absent. She never said a bad word about him to me. Still doesn't. He's a decent guy, but looking back at all of the hard work she did and how much I took her for granted and revered him, it must have been hard for her. But she never complained about it. I don't know that I have that kind of strength of character. Story 2. I was a daddy's girl despite him leaving when I was 3 and only seeing him sporadically since then. She never said anything bad about my dad when I was growing up. She even sued him for child support, but we didn't hear a word of it. I only found it years later when I Googled him and saw a few court documents pertaining it. I love my dad. We have a fairly good relationship and I have my mom to thank for that. It's hard for a child to understand that fathers, and mothers for that matter, are people too and are therefore flawed. Learning of my father's flaws when I was much older helped me understand him more than I would if I learned of them as a child. Story 3. Dads can be great people, but also take care of themselves without regard to the pressure it puts on moms to be the rock of the family. They are seen as the fun parent who is easygoing, and kids don't understand why mom is such a drag sometimes. It is difficult for moms when this happens, but a great mom never badmouths the father of their children to the kids because they understand that to a child, who intuitively knows they are half dad, if mom bashes dad, the kid feels bashed. You have a fantastic, loving, intuitive, and nurturing mom. Good for you in recognizing it. Story 4. The fact she continues to support me no matter how many times I screw up. It is so easy to screw up today because we have so many opportunities that almost any choice we make can be considered as a fail from certain point of views. There is always greener grass somewhere. I feel like my whole life I chose wrong, but I always stick to my decision and made new ways when I reached a dead end. My mother clearly wasn't always happy with that, but she is also my role model. With 50 years old, she learned a total new job after her mother died. She started to learn English and survived a devastating divorce from my father and suffers breast and lung cancer. She still is like a rainbow almost every day, living her life like she wants it. She is a hero to me and shows me that career choices are nothing someone else should make for you. Story 5. Thursday was Mother's Day for Hispanics. One of my staff members said how he would call his mom and wish her a happy Mother's Day but wouldn't be able to this year. She passed away earlier in the year. I mentioned he has his wife at least, and he told me in a serious tone, it's not the same. He said a mother's love is not a love that anyone can just give you, not even your so. Which echoed what my mom had told me several times over the years, that a mom's love will always be different from the love anyone else can or will offer you. Story 6. She showed me how to be polite and how to love others because of who they are. She is a scarred person, with her father being a predator featured on AMW. Schizophrenia and subsequent addiction she's still not able to put behind her. But even if I didn't know her sober for most of my life, she would always show us manners and love and generosity. I'll always treasure that about her. Story 7. English is my mom's second language and she learned it when she was in her late 30s, so she's not the best at it. However, one of my favorite things is how instead of saying, "You're welcome," she says, "The welcome." It always makes me smile because it is so endearing. She's just an amazing, wholesome person who did everything she possibly could, like working 2 jobs when I was growing up, just to help give me a good life. She's always there for me for whatever reason and does whatever she can to make me feel better. Whether it's driving to my apartment to drop off soup when I'm feeling sick, to being there for me for the biggest emotional loss I had experienced when I lost my dog, Snoopy, after almost 17 years together. My mom is awesome and I am so grateful to be her son. Story 8. She always wants to talk to every one of her kids. There are 5 of us, all grown with our own crazy work schedules and everything, and she will always put everything else aside day or night to answer the phone and just talk to any one of us for hours on end. In fact, I don't think a day has ever gone by that she didn't either talk on the phone or text all of us at least once. I live on the other side of the world from my hometown and family, and she is still one of the most active people in my life who hears about every little thing that happens. Really, that means the most to me of all the amazing things she has done in my life. The simple fact that she actually cares to be a part of our lives without judgment or expectations, but just because that is honestly how she wants to spend her time. Story 9. My mom's there for me, she always is. I've got Asperger's, ADHD, mild Gilles de la Tourette and features of ADD. I know she's got to put up with me every day, and I can't thank her enough for that. She's loving and caring and so amazing, and I know it can be hard for her. She's tired, but she is always there. She's my world. Story 10. I was born with a severe and extremely rare neuromuscular condition, and just over 10 years ago my mom helped set up a charity to raise funds for research into it with the eventual goal of a treatment. Last year the first kids were treated with gene therapy, with apparently fantastic results, and later this year several other clinical trials are starting up. This probably wouldn't have been possible, or at least it would have taken far longer, without my mom's initial charity work. I don't think I'll ever be able to repay her if a treatment materializes. Story 11. I'm the optimist amongst a sea of realists and pessimists of my friends and family, except for my mom. The woman has been through bad most of her life, and she still manages to get up in the morning in hope. She still puts herself out there knowing she could get hurt by people because she still wants to hope. I've gone through crap in life too, but I got my stubborn optimism from her, and I keep looking forward to the next day and what could happen. So yeah, the bad stuff exists and it sucks, but that's not all life can be, and I refuse to let myself believe that's all it is because of my mom. Story 12. She's just a really sensible, sane, competent person. So many of my friends have embarrassing or annoying moms, the latter being more of a problem now that we're in our 30s. My mom is healthy, has an amazing sense of fashion, is very smart, super responsible, and is loved and respected by so many people around her. That means we can just focus on having a great relationship and spending quality time together. I traveled 100 kilometers today to see her. No regrets. We had an absolute blast shopping, chatting, and hanging out with my dad and dog. There's no drama and no pressure. Story 13. My mom was and is an amazing person. She reared 3 girls by herself and spent basically our whole lives in school. In 2008, she achieved her dream and graduated from law school and passed the Massachusetts ethics test in one go, which is harder than the bar exam, followed by the actual bar. I've always been very proud of her, as she went against all odds, single, young mother with multiple children. She taught us that being female can't stop you, being a mother can't stop you, and if you don't speak for yourself no one will. She taught the 3 of us that all we had were each other, and we were all very close, and still are. I know it was a serious struggle for her, and having children myself now, I can truly appreciate everything she did for us in the face of those struggles. Story 14. Being an immigrant, my mom is an avid learner who taught herself English, which came in handy in communicating with her children that grew up as native English speakers. This greatly improved our relationship moving forward, as I could communicate what I had to say to her. On the other hand, my dad never bothered to learn very much English, so I had to spend one day of the weekend for 7 years learning my parents' native language. It did little to tear down the language barrier between my dad and I, since we never fully understood each other. I bet you can guess which one I looked up to growing up. Story 15. She passed away 2 years ago this month, unexpectedly of a heart attack, but I kept some of her clothes to smell. It has her natural scent, which I remember smelling every morning growing up. I took over her phone when she passed and left the voicemail message on there so I can listen to her voice. My last birthday card she wrote "I love you" 2 months before she died. I had it tattooed on my arm. She has the most beautiful handwriting. But what I really miss is her hug. Fathers of Reddit. In honor of Father's Day, what was your "don't tell your mother about this" moment? Story 1. While building the outdoor play set for my 5-year-old, I drilled a screw completely through a board and into my shoe, barely stopping just as the screw broke skin. I swore right in front of him, something along the lines of "Mother ducking screw Mother F." We are sworn to secrecy to this day. Story 2. My dad has passed away, so I'll tell this on his behalf. My sister was maybe 10 or 11. My dad was very worried and had been waiting all day for us to come home from school. When we got home, he pulled her aside saying he needed to have a serious talk with her. He said to her, "I was looking for a pencil, and found this in your desk," and pulled out a plastic baggie filled with some dried plant material. She said, "Oh, catnip?" He thought it was pot. We would make little cat toys with catnip, and the bag had ripped, so she put it in a Ziploc bag. He sighed a huge sigh of relief and laughed and told her he thought she was doing drugs and asked her not to tell our mom. He was so embarrassed. Story 3. Saying this in honor of my dad, as he is very old and does not read it. He once cut the end of my toe off as a baby, cutting my sharp baby nails, and my screaming brought in my brother. He joined forces to get me all bandaged up and told my mother I'd banged it into a wall or trapped it in a door or something. My mom found out, and by extension so did I, when I was 10. A wholesome one. For my mom's 50th birthday, he bought her a set of vintage diamond and pearl earrings and a necklace. I helped him choose them out. I'm never allowed to tell her just how much they cost. Story 4. My son randomly walked to the kitchen, 3 a.m., was finishing up some Call of Duty, and he saw me eating ice cream. So I got him a bowl and we were whispering like nerds. He was 4, and I said, "Don't tell mom," and he said, "Don't tell mom." Didn't do the dishes the following morning, and my wife asked who had ice cream. Son of a crap pointed right at me, lol. Story 5. Not a father, but I was with my dad and we thought it was a good idea to start a small fire on the porch, the wooden porch. It was made of mostly paper and we made sure to scatter the embers and everything, but after we went inside into bed, the wind must have kicked up because we came outside the next day and there was a giant hole burned into the porch. My dad just told me, "Hey, don't tell your mom, I'll get it fixed." He then proceeded to cover it with a small table. She found out anyway, and we're pretty lucky that the house didn't burn down. Story 6. Dad and I used to rent a movie each week for when mom had dinner with friends. Usually things like Star Trek or action films. One day, I was about 11, he came home with Blade. We got about 10 minutes in and he turns to me and said, "Don't tell your mother about this, let's just say I forgot to get it this week." Of course I agree. Fast forward 7-ish years, Dad blithely drops at the dinner table the fact that we watched Blade when I was about 11. Silly Dad thought there was some kind of statute of limitations on this. Story 7. Not a real don't tell your mother about this moment, but when I was little, my dad had a workshop in the garage where he'd do woodwork. I'd come out and talk to him while he worked, and he'd let me sit in the car that was parked in the garage. He framed it as something that was so bad and edgy and we couldn't tell my mom, and I was 5, so I believed it and felt so cool without actually doing anything wrong or dangerous. Story 8. Daughter speaking for her father. In high school, everybody was always busy at work or clubs, so I was the first one in my household to get home nearly every single day. Dad was having money troubles that he didn't want to disclose to anyone, so he paid me $5 a month to take the bank statement letter from the mailbox and hide it from my stepmom until he got home. It was the closest thing I got to an allowance. P.S. I had no idea what the money trouble was, by the way. I was always the don't ask, don't tell person, so that's why he trusted me the most about this. Story 9. Not a father, but a story about mine. One day I decided to pull a sick day at school and came downstairs and saw that my dad was making a coffee. I asked him what he was doing and why he wasn't at work, and he said I could ask you the same question. We stood in silence for a moment and he said, "I won't tell your mom if you won't." We had a good laugh about it and he let me have the day off. Story 10. When my wife's at work, I will take my daughter, 4-year-old, out for breakfast, then we will go on a small adventure around a shop of her choice and pretend whatever she wants. Last time we went to a car parts shop and rolled tires around as we were freeing the Rawlings from Monster. So far my wife doesn't believe her when she later on grasses me up. TBH, it's the only thing pre-COVID I miss doing. Story 11. Dad was putting new roof shingles on. I was probably 3, maybe 4. I asked if I could help. He said if I could climb the ladder, sure. I was always climbing, so that was no issue. Climbed right on up and started handing him shingles. It would have been a don't tell your mother moment had she not come home from grocery shopping. After several back and forth of where are you and up here mom, she figured it out and flipped out. What is he doing on the roof? Edit, I'm not a dad, so I posted on behalf of my dad. Story 12. Story about my father. When I was about 6 or 7, we were really hard up for money at the time, so we cut down on all expenses, saving change, etc. My mom would go out of town for work every other weekend. My dad would save up a few dollars over the weeks, take me to Waffle House for breakfast, go on a walk on the beach, then take me home and let me play the I Spy computer game on his work computer. He would always teasingly tell me not to tell mom about Waffle House. I don't think she would have been mad, but it was fun to have something just the two of us would do together. I love my dad. Story 13. I have always worked in restaurants and get home late nights. On Fridays I treat myself to takeout. Not just any takeout, the bad stuff. Cheese fries topped with gyro meat, steak nachos with guac. Always a large, always with a big bottle of beer they sell singly. When my girls were little they would sneak down late at night and we would munch bad food and watch really bad funny movies with all the swear words in. Story 14. One for my dad. My dad took me to my first MLB game, God I miss baseball, and told me not to tell my mom. Later found out it was because the game was a good bit outside of the travel radius set in the custody agreement. They were arguing a lot more than usual at the time, so he knew mom would say no if he asked about it, but really wanted to take me to a game. Told me not to say anything so she couldn't use it against him while trying to take him to family court again. Luckily I didn't say anything and we got to keep sneaking away to games until the travel radius stopped being a thing. Dad still has the tickets too. Story 15. When I was in middle school I was the only one willing to go shopping for groceries with my dad. He didn't want to go alone and my mom was at school studying her master's. None of my siblings wanted to go with him. We used to go to Carl's Jr., have a big breakfast, and then we went grocery shopping. Nobody knew, not even my mom, until years later. He would also let me buy any cereal I wanted. That's actually how I learned how to buy good fruit and veggies, how to order meat and fish, etc. When my siblings found out they were angry BC, they would have gone if a big breakfast was on the menu. My mom just laughed. Nowadays they sneak to have breakfast together before going grocery shopping since we're all grown up. So, what is your excuse for not calling your mother? Story 1. She has dementia and has forgotten how to use the phone. Unless an aide is in the room when I call, the phone will just ring and drive her crazy. I visit her in person instead, even though sometimes she doesn't know who I am. My husband's grandma seemed to think I'm a family member from bygone years. Her face lit up when we would visit. Obviously she loved seeing my husband, but she also always seemed really happy to see me too. She always told him how big he's grown and how long my hair has gotten. We're both over 30. She had to go into a nursing home a few months ago and can't remember who my husband is anymore, which is really sad, but she still seems really happy, which we are very grateful for. Story 2. Last time I saw her she yelled at me to go live with my dad, and when I actually started packing my things and leaving she yelled, "You don't want to take care of your own mother," and proceeded to beat me and call the cops, saying I'm the one who hit her even though I had cuts, marks, and bruises all over my face and neck. She never got in trouble and she did all this in front of my 3-year-old sister. She also told me I would be dead if I ever came back. We haven't spoken since and I don't plan to ever speak to her again. Story 3. My mom picked out all my clothes on colors she liked, forced me to study classes she liked, told me which school friends I was allowed to talk to, tried to pick my university degree, tried to get me to quit my hobby as an adult, tried to break up my engagement, and tried to force me to have kids. I went no contact. There's abuse and neglect in addition to that. Manic depressive narcissist. I still want a loving mom and I'm 40 now. Story 4. She's a helicopter parent despite not being around when I was a child and leaving me to be raised by my sister. My mom is a narcissist and this is very familiar. It was okay for her to take long weekend trips for days, leaving a 5-year-old with a 13-year-old. However, I'm a bad mom for going out on my anniversary and leaving my child with an adult neighbor who I paid for 3 hours. Because you're a mom now, you aren't allowed to go out. Helicopter as in going to the school and starting trouble to pretend like she cared over really petty crap. Overdress you for the weather to be seen as a good mom. Dress you up like a doll so no one would even question that she was abusive, because in her head if the image is good and she's hovering around, the kid won't be believed. Story 5. Phones work two ways. I call a few times a year. She never has. I have asked her to come visit. She does not ask me to come up. I have visited her. She has never visited me. Relationships require both to put effort in. After years of only me putting in time and effort, I have learned that I am not that important to her. Story 6. Went to her for the first time about being severely depressed and suicidal for the past 10 years of my life. She made it completely about herself. I was crying in the fetal position as a 25-year-old man on her bedroom floor. She asked me something, but I was in an almost frozen state and couldn't think of speak. She got pissed off at me and started berating me for not answering when I was the one who went to her. Somehow I've kept her in my life. No, I don't call first, but do not avoid contact. I'm not sure if that's a healthy move. My excuse is having a huge lineup of past events that show me just how selfish she is despite her words contradicting her actions. Story 7. Last time she was in front of me, she told me that I am weird because I was born a few days after Chernobyl and the radiation must have done something to my head, her own words. Mind you, she says I am weird because I am not emotional. I prefer remaining calm and not succumb to stress. Because I have some depression, social anxiety, and some undiagnosed social difficulties, I'm an overthinker or overanalyzer. It surely has nothing to do with my father being an alcoholic and extremely violent to her and his children. Nothing at all. So, I will not call her because I know that talking about it will not help with anything. I just act busy since this month began. I'll have to call her one day. I'm not even upset. I just don't want to talk to her and throw away all those years of therapy. Fortunately, we live in different towns. Story 8. She's an alcoholic and relapsed about a year or two ago, and despite us getting her in a position to get proper help several times, she chose booze plus moving in with random dudes over and over again. The last straw was her getting blackout drunk and passing out on a public sidewalk and then getting picked up by the cops. My sister took her to the ER after that and then uninvited her from her wedding, and we all blocked her, telling her to call us when she's sober. Hasn't called us, but did text me happy birthday 10 days after my birthday. Last I heard, she's working in a liquor store. Story 9. Because I can't afford extra sessions with my therapist, and my mom won't consent to mediated conversations with my therapist because she thinks mental health professionals are in league with Satan. My mom has 4 children. 2 of us cut her out of our lives entirely. One of us decided to see what would happen if he stopped calling her, and now they haven't spoken in 3 years. My half-brother that she abandoned as a child still talks to her occasionally because she's somehow less awful than his father, and he's desperate to have a parent in some fashion, but their relationship is entirely superficial. Untreated mental illness can be pretty awful. Story 10. She was an abusive alcoholic, now she's a morbidly obese pill popper who is always so out of it she can't eat without crumbs and debris falling around her. She's a hoarder of jewelry she will sell. Dozens of bins full of tacky nonsense that she hasn't touched in a decade. She leaves food on the couch, doesn't clean anything, and doesn't work. She would love to start a fight with me and then tell my father lies to get me in trouble. It doesn't work anymore and hasn't for 7 years. Now we just placate her. I hate. I tried with that cunt, just waiting for her to die first. Story 11. I had to cut ties with her. The one person in the world you should be able to trust to give you good advice is your mother. Instead, my mother gave me advice that suited her needs or aligned with her plans versus what supported my goals. It's a long-winded story that unraveled over a decade as we slowly grew apart, and I confided less in her, but the final straw came about 3 years ago when she refused to come to her only grandchild's wedding. She now calls my brother every week and fake cries about losing her family, totally her fault, and ignores the fact that he's still talking to her. Yup, makes him feel wonderful, not. Story 12. She's drank the MAGA Kool-Aid, and I'm sick of hearing about how Hunter Biden hacked COVID to attack white people the most, or whatever the insane crap of the day is. What makes it worse is even asking a simple "what makes you think that," as the ensuing screeching will contain nothing resembling a coherent answer. If you're not even going to try to explain why you think some insane crap is real, just screw off already. Fox has melted these people's brains. She probably still doesn't know that I blocked her, though my dad still isn't blocked and I haven't heard anything in years, so I guess that's that. Story 13. My mother is a narcissist and I put up with her for 32 years. I broke contact with her more than 1 year ago and I have not had an anxiety attack since. I have not called suicide prevention since. I have felt better about myself and my family in the past year than my entire life combined. I'm done with her. Story 14. Mine is a psychopath who has brainwashed my sister, father, and my children. I used to be brainwashed by her in the past and have realized the truth about her. She attempted murder in her own father. Physically attacked her own mother. When her mother and my first wife passed, my mother said, "Thank God the bitch is dead." This comment was about two different people 20 years apart. She turned my kids against me. Made them scared of me. She is trying to ruin me financially by having my sister try and fight me for custody of my children and get child support from me. All I can say is thank God my prayers have been answered by my mother's own family and her cousins. They are on my side and I have tons of proof of how much of a psychotic crap my mother has been her entire life. I could go on about her more, but that's for the court to hear. Story 15. Answer from someone whose mother is not a horrible person, not dead, and who also doesn't live with her. I don't really know what to talk about. A 30-something man has little in common with a 60-something woman, even if they're blood relatives and come from the same household. Our interests don't overlap at all, and both our lives have become dull enough that we never have exciting news to talk about. I'd love to be closer to my mom, but I don't really know how to connect beyond surface small talk that feels more like a social obligation rather than a conversation. Moms of Reddit, what do you actually want for Mother's Day? Story 1. I want to go to the park with my husband and son. Maybe go out for lunch somewhere together. And I don't want to be the one to have to initiate things we do together as a family. I'm editing to add this because I have gotten comments that make a good point. It's a good idea to be appreciative of any attempts by your partner when he makes an attempt to plan things. The best way to encourage this behavior to reward any little attempt they make rather than complain when they do try. Story 2. After several years of telling my husband I didn't care what we did as long as I didn't have to clean the house in advance, plan it, or help clean up, and that never happened, last year I booked a spa appointment from breakfast to right before lunch. Texted my husband and said I was busy from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. and where should I meet you and the kids for lunch? It was perfect and I'm repeating this year. Story 3. Champagne. Someone to come deep clean my house. Someone to cook me dinner while I sit on the couch with a drink. My sister and I did the cleaning elves for special occasions like Mother's Day and birthdays. We'd stay up late until my parents went to bed, and then cleaned the whole house as quiet as we could. Mom would play dumb when she'd come out in the morning and act like we weren't making so much noise all night. Edit, wow, my first medal. Thanks. If you don't have a mom this coming month, do a little act of kindness for the mom-like figure in your life. Motherhood comes in all shapes and forms and deserves recognition at least once a year. Peace out. Story 4. I want a house that stays clean for more than an hour, a meal I didn't make that I don't have to clean after, and a lovely day with my children and husband without having to worry about spending money. And chocolate, and a nap I don't have to set an alarm for. Story 5. Not to be needed for just a day. I took a trip by myself a couple of years ago and the absolute best part was not being needed by anyone. I could just relax without worrying about when my relaxation would be interrupted by my husband and kid coming home and needing help with stuff or attention. Don't get me wrong, I love spending time with them and shower them with attention and cuddles, but I really miss having uninterrupted time without having to worry about getting texts asking me where something is or if we have milk or whatever, or watching the clock wondering how much time I have left. Story 6. My husband and I pretty well do everything equally. Today was a public holiday, so I went for a jog about 8:30 a.m. and got back after the baby had gone down for a nap and he was vacuuming. After the lunch nap, we all went to the park. Then this afternoon he went for a jog and I entertained the kid and cooked dinner. This weekend I'm going to the hairdresser, so he'll take her to swimming class. And next weekend I'll do swimming while he does something else. Even so, I fully agree with wanting a cleaner for Mother's Day. When you both work full-time, it's hard trying to fit in family time, us time, you time, and cleaning time. Story 7. I want my mother-in-law to step down and realize the day is no longer all about her and only her. She's got 2 daughter-in-laws who are raising her grandchildren, our steps' kids, week in, week out, and we want some recognition. And we don't want to eat pasta for lunch at a restaurant we hate. Story 8. For somebody else to deal with my mother-in-law, she lives with us and enjoys her dementia for the day. I don't want flowers or candy. I want to not have to get up before everyone else and get the household moving. I want to be able to go to bed before 11 p.m. and actually zonk out. I want to read a book undisturbed. I want my kid to take a shower without me reminding him to do so. I want my husband to get up before I do. I want our partner to get up before noon. I want my MIL to have an hour of not being a self-absorbed, self-important, self-aggrandizing crap from age, which she's been for the 30-plus years I've known her. This isn't just the dementia. I want the cats to not pick on the dog. I want the dog to just flop on the couch next to my MIL, so she can shower him with the affection she obviously has for him. I want to get out of the house for an hour. Story 9. I just want time with my kids, busy adults. And it looks like that's gonna happen. She lives and works 4 hours away, but they're coming up for the weekend. Her brother is a newish dad, with his newish business and an old professional fishing habit that doesn't always make room for Mother's Day. So we may celebrate according to our own calendars. And that's fine with me. Story 10. I have a 17-year-old daughter, and I'm a single mom. I'd like to be able to sleep late. She could feed the dog and put him outside, and make her own breakfast. Then I'd like a letter from her saying she loves me, and remembering some of the times we've enjoyed or that I helped her. I became a single mom by adopting my daughter when she was 2. I remember how hurt I used to feel on Mother's Day back when I was discouraged that I might not ever have a child. And honestly, I think of my child's birth mom, too, on Mother's Day. She is deceased, and I know it's a bittersweet, mixed-up feelings kind of day for all adoptees, birth mothers, and adoptive mothers. Story 11. I don't care about gifts of any kind, permanent or perishable. If I want something, I'll buy it myself. I just want us to spend some time together. It could be anything you want as long as we get to interact. It's not just because I want the company, though I do appreciate that. I want to see how much you've grown since the last Mother's Day. I wouldn't be doing my job as a mother unless I were helping someone mature. I'd want to know how you've been in the last year, what you plan to do in the future, how you think I've been as a parent, or anything that we haven't talked about before. If there's anything you've learned with or without me, that makes me proud. If there's anything you can teach me, more power to you. Seeing my children grow up to be good and reasonable people means more than anything else to me. Story 12. I had a miscarriage because my medical care providers refused to listen to me. My uterus pressed on the lines to my bladder and gave me an infection. Really simple and common thing to happen during pregnancy. It's completely treatable and should never be more than a mild inconvenience. I went septic and we almost died together. What I want for Mother's Day is for women, and especially women of color, to stop receiving medical care worse than that of a third world country. If I get a second request, it would be universal health care. I'm over $16,000 in debt for someone who attempted to kill me and my child. This is insane and I have no way of paying it. Even if I did, why would I want to? Every time I receive a bill, it makes me break down in tears, in a combination of I lost my baby and I can't afford this. Story 13. Man, I'm grateful for my setup. All these mamas who just want help. May I take a moment to brag? I have 2 kids, 12 and 6. They only care about their screens, so they don't have a lot of stuff, and I'm a bit of a minimalist, so the house is always pretty tidy. My husband likes getting up early, so he is always up with the 6-year-old who wakes up at 5:30 a.m. without fail. They like going on adventures together, so I get plenty of me time. 12-year-old is often with friends or bunkered up in her room, so is fairly low maintenance. They're all pretty helpful and pull their weight. So for Mother's Day I would like some houseplants. Oh. After all that bragging. A day without the kids just ripping into each other in crap and arguing about nothing, that would be a gift. How does a 12-year-old even get offended by a 6-year-old? Like, just let it go. That's frustrating. Story 14. What I want is my husband not to ask me what I want. I want him to just figure something out with the kids. However, I do love when they bring me little artwork they be made at school or on their own. I save each one. That makes me so happy. This Mother's Day I just want a pedicure and a margarita at our favorite Mexican place. That sounds so good right now. Story 15. I just want one day to be me, not mom, wife, daughter, employee, etc. Every single day is spent taking care of someone else, operating on their schedule, fulfilling their wants and needs. I'd love one day where my husband can find all his stuff on his own, the kids follow the routine we have every single day without prompting and fighting, one day where my mom doesn't blow up my phone while I'm at work because she forgot her email password again and got locked out, and can I fix it and log in and print some things and bring them to her on my lunch break? One day where I can sit down and eat my dinner instead of shoving a stale granola bar in my face while cooking things I don't eat because nobody else here eats like me. One day to sit down at a computer, open a Word doc, close my eyes, and pour out the stories I've been yearning to write for years, from back when I had spare time and the creative energy. I'd settle for a root beer float though. Redditors who have a stepfather/mother younger than them, what's your story? Story 1. I found out my dad died because he stroked out while in a motel with someone younger than me. This was, to our knowledge, the third time he'd cheated in a long-term relationship, and he was already married to someone 20 years younger than him. None of this really affected me because I knew he was a piece of crap for years, so I guess it's not really a great answer to this thread, but it's still kind of amazing. Story 2. The story is simply that my father is an irresponsible creep. It was just the two of us when I was growing up, but he made it clear he was resentful having to take care of me. He's in his 60s. I'm 34, my older half-sister turns 40 in a few days. My youngest half-brother just turned 2. I'm sure I have siblings I don't even know about. His current wife is maybe 30 and by far the oldest woman he's ever been with. He cheated on his last wife with her. His last wife was 19 when they met, I was 17. But that was better than his previous girlfriend before that, who was a few months younger than me, and I was 17. I always make sure that his baby mama knows that I'll always be there for them and their kids when he leaves, because he's going to leave. It's interesting watching how surprised they are when he does. Story 3. My dad is 71. 6 months ago he left my mom for a 25-year-old. I'm 33 and my sister is 28. His new girlfriend is 6 months pregnant. They're not married because my parents' divorce hasn't gone through yet, but I guess once that happens I'll have a stepmom who is 8 years younger than me and a newborn half-sister. This will be my dad's third marriage. The first one ended because he slept with his brother's wife. So the story here is, my dad is trashy. Story 4. My mother's husband is 2 years younger than my husband. My husband is 7 years older than me. So my mom's guy isn't younger than me, but it still is a weird dynamic. My mom jokes that I always dated older and she always dated younger, so it was bound to happen. We actually made a pact when I was 20 that I wouldn't date anyone older than her, and she promised she wouldn't date anyone younger than me. We both had some close calls but held true to the pact. The only really weird thing is watching our husbands interact. They are serious best friends whenever there is a family get-together. If we can't find one, we look for the other. There isn't a cookout or birthday party where they decide to give each other piggyback rides or cake eating contest or something silly and fun. My favorite thing is when my husband yells, "You aren't my real dad, you can't tell me what to do." They are goofballs. Story 5. Okay, so my dad loves controlling people. He was really abusive to me growing up. I'm sure if you need any stories, just dig through my history. He used to always go on about wanting a Chinese wife because she'd be really grateful and meek enough towards him that he wouldn't get any arguments or independent thought from her, unlike an American/English wife. Well, not long after declaring the above, he met and married a 21-year-old Chinese woman, his late 50s. I was 23 at the time. The way he treats her in public is revolting. He is so condescending and talks real slow and firm, like someone would to a toddler. He tells her off and calls her names. It was so sad to see. I don't know for sure, but she may have left him, as, when I was last in contact with him, he never brought her with him or spoke about her. Story 6. So my Bill is 30, and his wife is 55. She has 7 children from 4 previous marriages/relationships. 3 of her 7 are over 30 years old. The look on their faces when they came my BIL at the wedding was something to behold. Her youngest is 10 and lives with his father, the other 6 are 18 plus and live on their own. At least 2 are also married. Story 7. Dad is a serial monogamist? He has been married 4 times. This last wife is 5 years younger than me. She is 25. My dad is 52. She gave birth to my brother last year, which resulted in an interesting conversation with my kids. Me showing my 6 and 5 years olds a picture of their new uncle. Me, "Look guys, this is your new uncle, isn't he cute?" Kids, "That's not an uncle, that's a baby." Caps are accurate. SMH, she is young and acts like it, and my dad is hella gross for dating a girl younger than his daughter. But it's his life. It makes for weird genealogy talks with others, but that's all. Story 8. After my mom and her 2 sisters had graduated from high school, my grandparents got divorced. A few years later, my grandpa married one of my aunt's friends from high school. According to my mom, it was a real big deal that had a lot of people talking and pissed off. My aunts all hated her instantly, and one of them even did the "OL put sugar in the gas tank" thing. Oddly enough as it may seem, my grandpa is still married to her, and my step-grandma is a pretty cool person. Everyone seems to get along now. Unfortunately, my grandpa has dementia pretty bad right now, and my step-grandma is pretty diligent about caring for him, so I have a lot of respect for her. My grandpa doesn't even know who she is anymore. It's been an interesting story, I suppose. Story 9. My step-grandmother is a 50-year-old biker chick, covered in tattoos, 7 years younger than my mother. My grandmother committed suicide in 2009, leaving my socially inept and cantankerous grandfather behind. He moved to a retirement community, where he's gotten in some trouble for shooting a fawn from his front porch with a shotgun. A few years after my grandmother's death, he started proposing marriage to his housekeeper. He didn't want her to live with him. Just wanted to pass on his pension from working in the police department. Only a spouse could inherit it, not children. It took her many years, but eventually she accepted. No wedding. They're not really together. But now my step-grandmother's younger than my mother. Story 10. My dad is married to a 25-year-old waitress. I am 26. When I was 18-19, me and my family used to go to the place she waited at, and every time I would silently pray we were going to seat it in her section, because I had a huge crush. My dad would always be a dad and drop some dad jokes, waitress style. I always thought she was laughing at these jokes to be polite. Turns out she thought they were genuinely funny. They got together 5 years ago. He still goes to the same place to eat, and she still is waitress. The jokes are worse now though. Story 11. My dad, my mom and my, now, stepmom all worked at Pizza Hut together. My stepmom also lived across the street from us. I was 8. My mom and dad split up. My dad slept with my stepmom, knocked her up, got back with my mom 6 months later and knocked her up, then went back to my stepmom. This is why I have a half-sister who is 6 months older than my full brother. Story 12. Kind of related, My younger sister had a concert date set up with a guy, but he called and said last second that he set up other plans. It's a small town and his dad just happened to be at the same bar as my sister and she invited his dad instead. It's been almost 2 years and they have a baby together now. So he flaked on her, and she made him her stepson. Story 13. My dad married a woman 7 years younger than I am. They have a 35+ age difference. Their daughter is now 2 years older than my son. They live in the country where I was born and I've only met her 2x, but my sister and I support them financially. He abandoned us when my sister and I were 10 and 12, and had another set of children with another woman then. I am very wistful when I see dads being good to their daughters. My mom is amazing though, and my son and I are super close, so all things considered I'm still better off than most. Story 14. My dad married someone who was not much older than me. She is younger than my brother. When they got married, she was 30, my brother was 32. My parents were married for 30 years, but no one was happier than my brother and I when they got divorced. I didn't care about the age difference, my dad seemed to be happy. I didn't really like her as a person. She's selfish, demanding, and generally just a winner. One time she was visiting my husband, son, and I, and she locked herself in the guest room because she thought I hated her for trying to replace my mom. My mom's still around. Crap, I just don't like you. I tried harder to be nice to her after that, even if I didn't want to. These days, they are separated, about to be divorced. My dad is in his 70s now, she's in her late 40s. Story 15. I used to work with a guy, Chris, whose best friend, David, was also his stepdad. Basically, when they were in school, David used to go to Chris' house a lot and hang out, and somewhere along the line, David started going over just to see Chris' mom. Eventually, they started actually seeing each other, and eventually got married. I think David was like a year or two younger than Chris. What's strange to me is that Chris never moved out, he just kept living there with his best friend and mom. I never noticed any signs that they found it weird at all, they still came to work together and hung out like friends. It was a weird setup. What's the most common lie told by mothers? Story 1. I'll be right back, says mother as you're in the grocery checkout line, as the conveyor belt proceeds to complete conveying all the groceries, and then the nice man tells you the total. All the while you curse your mother for taking you to the grocery store in the first place. Still no sight of mom. Story 2. Man, I'm 22 and still get ticked when my parents do this to me. Had one crap experience recently at Costco where my father went back to get eggs. We were in line at the time, so he should have been back in time but wasn't. I got scolded by the checker for not letting an employee get the thing we forgot. There wasn't anyone behind me waiting either, so it's not like we were wasting anyone's time but our own. I still panic about that. Story 3. My parents told me I was allergic to sugar and would die if I ate it. They even went and brought alternative snacks to my school teachers like carrot sticks and peanuts for them to stock up for me and hand out when the other kids got birthday cupcakes. Not the worst thing they could have done to me, but it sucked. I totally believed them until I went to visit my aunt and realized that ice cream and M&Ms were amazing. But the weirdest thing was that until the 5th grade I believed in the Halloween fairy. I still got to dress up in a costume and go trick-or-treating for hours, but at the end of the night I would leave my bag of candy outside my bedroom door, and overnight the fairy would take it and leave me a new bag full of crackers and fruit snacks and other treats, while in reality my parents just ate all my candy. Story 5. I was pretty broke one week, but wanted to treat my 2 kids. We went to Pizza Hut and I got them 2 personal pizzas and nothing for myself. What cash I had left I needed for gas. Oldest kid doesn't realize until the waitress sat their plates down and he's like, "Miss, you forgot my mom's." And I'm like, "No, it's okay, I'm not hungry yet, so you guys eat your pizza and enjoy." And he just kept side-eyeing me during the meal. He saved me his crusts. Sobbed when they went to bed that night. Story 6. I love you and you are very important to me. Should be I love your healthy organs and they are very important to me. 10 years later I found out that she only adopted me because I have the same blood type and she wanted someone to feel in debt to her and donate organs since she's had ongoing battles with cancer. Bish adopted me just to harvest my organs. Needless to say, I didn't give her anything. The second she found a dude that's willing to put up with her crap and willingly agreed to give her organs, I was ignored. Story 7. Every time I had a birthday party when I was a kid, my mom would take all of the presents that people brought and put them in a bag. She called it a grab bag. Then at the end of the party, every kid would take something out of the bag home with them, leaving me with no presents. She told me that all birthday parties were supposed to be like that. You can imagine I was slightly peeved when I finally realized. Story 8. The worst lie she ever told me came when I was in my early 20s. I had just come out as gay to her, and after a week of really vile screaming and vitriol, she had a change of heart. Here's the lie. What are you talking about? I always knew you were gay. That's why I was so supporting and kept asking if you liked boys. I remember in college when I joined the gay rights movement and my father got so angry with me. The lie is beyond absurd. It's a complete rewrite of her own history. Like, it's not even plausible. She was a really vile homophobe up until that point, but just shifted her whole reality. No one that she knew in college, and I know a good number of her college friends, will back her up on the whole gay rights movement thing. She's still crap to me about it now, and tells people that I reject her motherly love. I'm not unwilling to forgive her, but she demands that I apologize to her and make it up to her. Nope. That is the lie that permanently scarred our relationship even more than the years of nastiness. Story 9. You're such a sweet boy. What a good child. I noticed my nephew was always getting showered with these compliments by the women in the family, and it made me remember how much used to I hear it too. I was not a good kid. Realized in my 30s it's conditioning to instill a sense of shame for acting bad. Story 10. As a mother, I'll tell you why I say maybe or later when I want to really say no. If I tell my son a flat-out no, it becomes an issue. You always say no, this goes on, and then we end up in an argument because all of a sudden he's pouting and rolling his eyes, and this almost always occurs out in public, where I can't act like a real mother. So, we'll see, or maybe prevents the madness temporarily. Also, sometimes I have a tendency to say no, no matter what, because I'm busy, or just out of touch at the moment, so I use maybe for more time to think about it. I know if it's something he really wants to do, and it's reasonable, more than likely I'll agree eventually, but I also like him to plead his case. That is an invaluable skill in the real world. I want him to be able to keep going so he doesn't just give up or feel defeated. I'm training him to be a strong-minded, but respectful human being. Story 11. Throughout children's lives their parents tell them how special they are, and that's great. The problem begins when people become adults and believe that that's still true. In my opinion, one of the most important parts of being an adult is understanding that you're not special. In fact, you're perfectly ordinary, and that's okay. There's a whole world full of people who think that they're just as important as you think you are. We identify with people who seem like us and polarize ourselves from people who seem different, all because we want reinforcement as to how special we really are. This, I assert, is one of the major problems with the world we live in. Story 12. I came home from school one day and didn't see my dad's car in the driveway. I got a little worried, so I asked my mom where he was, and she said he just had to stay at work a little longer and that he would be home soon. The way she said it made it seem like she knew more than she was letting on, and I got a little nervous. I went to my room to lay down, and, of course, as soon as I stepped foot past my door, my dad leaped out of my closet and started beating me relentlessly with his jumper cables. Story 13. You'll gain so much weight once you're pregnant. Kids will ruin your body. More like kids will have you running around losing weight since they're so active most of the time. There's actually a whole new set of activities you get to do as a mother, like take your children to the zoo, the park, or to a museum and spending the day there with them. Yes, you do gain weight while you are pregnant, but any gain over 40 pounds is not recommended for any person while pregnant. Most of it does come off quickly with proper diet post-pregnancy, however, meaning less processed food and more healthy fresh stuff. Losing weight is about 10% exercise, 90% diet. Story 14. As a mom to two littles who can't tell the difference between 5 minutes and 30 minutes. 5 minutes is probably my most used lie. We're eating in 5 more minutes. We'll be there in 5 minutes. Just give me 5 minutes. To a toddler, 5 minutes it's the perfect amount of time between being too long a wait but also being short enough that they feel they can wait. Don't judge me. It's about survival. Story 15. My parents told my brother and I that we were allergic to chocolate, so we never ate it. Didn't find out until my 18th birthday that I was allergic when my grandmother asked me if I wanted a piece of chocolate cake. She laughed and said she couldn't believe my parents told us the same thing she told my dad. Still have never tried chocolate. What was your don't tell your mother moment with your dad? Story 1. My dad used to drive me to my flute lessons across town every Wednesday evening. On our way back home every week, we'd stop at Baskin-Robbins and he'd let me get a double scoop and a waffle cone and we'd sit inside, take our time, and talk. It was a really special thing since both my parents worked 2 jobs and had to chauffeur around 2 high school-aged kids to various functions/activities. Getting to spend one-on-one time with either of my parents was a rare and fortunate thing. The thing was, they both worked 2 jobs because we weren't that well off, so weekly stops at Baskin-Robbins was a splurge thing and I wasn't to tell my mom or my brother about it. Schedules flipped around about a year later and my mom was the one to take me to flute lessons, and she'd always get good junk food from the gas station, easy cheese and wheat thins or potato wedges, and we'd eat in the car and talk. Neither parent knew the other spoiled me on Wednesdays. Story 2. When I was about 7, my mom bought a cheap blender for the kitchen. It was one of those ones where the blending thingy points downward, you have to insert the jug from the front, and it's designed in such a way that you can basically put any old cup in there and it will still work. Mom was very strict in that we were not allowed to use just any cup, we had to use the special blender jug. Dad hated that thing because it was a pain to clean. Soon, the day came when Mom was out, and I asked my dad if I could make a milkshake. He chucked all the ingredients straight into the milkshake cup and stuck that into the blender. I, being a bit of a snot, reminded him that we had to use the special jug, because Mom said so. Dad replied that, well, Dad can do it this way, because Dad said so, then promptly turned the blender on and sent milk, chocolate, banana, and ice cream splattering all over the kitchen ceiling. Story 3. One day in grade school, maybe grade 5 or 6, my dad came unexpectedly into the classroom early in the morning. He looked upset. He talked to the teacher for a minute, then walked over to me. He whispered, "Look upset. We're going skiing. Don't tell your mother." Best day ever. Thanks, Dad. Story 4. When I was young, my mom sometimes visited her mother for a week or so by herself. When she left, my father took us impulse shopping at the grocery store and we would live for the week on whatever my dad, my brother, and I picked out. I remember subsisting on liverwurst and gummy bears. Story 5. When, after several hours of failure and frustration and having to send me to bed halfway through the setup, my dad sneaking upstairs to wake 11-year-old me up just after midnight with the simple phrase, "I got the new PlayStation working. Come and have a go, but shush, your mom is in bed." First game we booted up was Alien Trilogy. Those graphics, man. Story 6. Growing up, my parents worked 1 full-time job and 2 to 3 part-time jobs to make ends meet. When I was 6 or 7, my mom had just had a tough week. She had been fired from one of her jobs, her brother called and asked for money again, meth addict, and she was just not doing well. When she was at her last job of the day, my dad is trying to make her something special for dinner. Bless his heart, he's so bad at cooking. He realizes he can't finish without some ingredient and he didn't take the time to put me in my car seat and take me through the store, so he leaves me on the couch with a book and a promise not to move. Then, he rushes to the store and while he's rushing back, he gets pulled over and gets a speeding ticket. He told me not to tell Mom and I guess paid it all off with part of his checks and just told my mom he hadn't worked as much. TLDR, my dad got a speeding ticket trying to do something nice for my mom. Story 7. Mine's a bit of a switch. When I was a kid, my family would go camping a lot and each time I would be given a budget of $5 to play video games at the arcade or to buy some snacks and ice cream. Well, one lovely Memorial weekend, as I rode my bike to the arcade, I came across a sign that said, "Kittens for sale. Only $5. Well, I spent that entire weekend over by their campsite playing with the kittens until eventually one of them grew on me to the point I had to have it. So the last day there I gave them my $5 and brought my buddy home. My mom quickly realized what happened and agreed to help me hide him until we got home, because my dad would never allow a cat. Poor guy didn't realize until we were already halfway home. Now I've had my best friend Oscar for 10 years. Story 8. When I had my driver's permit, my dad was supposed to help teach me to drive. He had me drive him everywhere, and teaching me consisted of him leaning the seat back, turning the radio on low volume, and napping until we got to our destination. I remember the first day it happened, he just said, "I'm supposed to be monitoring you closely and keeping an eye on every move you make, but I'm tired. You'll be fine. Just don't speed. And your mom doesn't need to know I'm asleep or she'll do something for us both." But Dad doesn't know is when my brother got his permit last year, Mom's way of teaching him to drive was the same concept. Story 9. My mother had to move away for a year for job-related reasons. I remember clearly that she sat my father down in the kitchen, who up until that point had been the one to work more and had been around less, and told him exactly what the rules were for us kids. One of them was being in bed by 9 p.m. As soon as she was out the door, my father turned to me and said, "Children of the Corn is on tonight, you want to watch it?" It was on at 2 a.m. and the first horror movie I watched, I was 11. Luckily I loved it, and horror movie nights became our secret thing to do when my mother wasn't around. Story 10. Once my mom was out of town and she left me with my dad. My dad, not being the best cook in the world, proposed to go out for a pizza. After the dinner he drove in the industrial area, a very well-known area, to receive some kind of special services during the night. So he approached a prostitute and asked how much for this young fella. I wanted to jump out off the passenger seat and run under a car. I was 16 at the time. I managed to bury and forget about this until today, thanks Reddit. Story 11. I was 13 and we were coming back from a trip. We were on an old highway that my dad had traveled a lot in his childhood. He was exhausted from driving the whole way through the night, so with an hour left, he pulled over, told me to trade seats with him, and told me to drive until we were back in town. I'd never driven before beyond a couple of lessons in a parking lot. He told me to keep it under the speed limit and don't pass anyone. I thought I'd be really big and I got on the interstate. An hour later, I pulled into the gas station by our mom's house and swapped back with him. He looked at me and said, "You did great, but remember to give semis more breathing room. Their brakes are better than ours." I had no clue he had been awake the entire time. Then he looked at my brother, "Don't even think about telling your mom, and you'll be doing this in a couple of years, too." Story 12. When I was 15, I used to skateboard up and down my street from the time I got home from school until I went to work. One day my dad met me at the end of the road coming home from his job, and told me to grab onto the bumper of his 1993 Bronco. I held it for a bit, but at around 20 miles per hour I started to lose control, and the wobble was too hard to handle. I was just wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and I destroyed my forearms and legs. I was scabbed up for quite a while, and my mom never knew that it was because I was pulled behind the car. I told her I went down a nearby hill too fast and lost control. My dad wrote me a couple sick notes for my silence, and I got to stay home from school and nonsense for a couple days. Story 13. For at least 10 years of my life, I bugged my parents to let me race cars. Finally, when I was 19, my dad agreed to let me do Skip Barber Racing School, but the only condition was that I couldn't let my mom know. She's super nervous and protective, and the only reasons I was never allowed to start racing was she could crash and die, and she's a girl and only boys like cars. She came from a very old-fashioned family. Anyways, my dad ended up withdrawing money as a money order to pay for racing school, and he told my mom that he was coming to visit me for the weekend during the 5 days that I had the classes. Mom still to this day doesn't know. Story 14. My dad would let me watch South Park with him, and the whole "oh my god, they killed Kenny, you crap" became our thing. The only time he'd let me curse was when my mom wasn't around. Then one day she overheard us, sad face, Dad got in trouble and he came sulking into my room and says, "Hey, in 7 Scully, we can't say it anymore." But I still got to watch South Park. Story 15. The time I saw Braveheart in the movies, despite being a kid. The time I first set off a firework. The time I and my father got into a mini brawl at the Meadowlands. My first visit to a strip club. My first drink. My first drink at a bar. My first porn magazine. The time he bought me my first package of condoms. The time he was teaching me how to drive and told me to bury the needle in the red. Literally any moment I spent with my dad out of my mom's vision. What is the craziest thing you have ever seen your mother do? Story 1. I've never heard my mother use any profanity in my entire life, not as a child or an adult. We had a retirement party for her, and a lot of co-workers showed up. She was her usual pleasant self, and at the end of the night, she got up from the table, called her boss a worthless piece of crap, and left the restaurant. Story 2. One night after kayaking with my parents, we got home really late, so we decided to leave the kayak strapped to the top of the Tahoe. In the middle of the night, my dad creeps in my room and peeks out my window. I wake up and he hushes me. My mom comes in and goes, "Come on." They head downstairs and I hear my dad pick up the phone and start talking to the police. I suddenly hear the front door slam open and my mom screamed, "Drop that kayak." The woman is outside pointing a butcher knife at 3 thieves, who also have knives, cutting the kayak down. I then hear my dad say to the police, "Hold on a second," followed by, "Sandy, what the?" The robbers ran off and my mom remains the baddest badass in the world. Story 3. We were driving down the road once when I was younger. My mom suddenly pulls into a random driveway and jumps out of the car and starts walking down the street the way me came. She bent down to pick something up. She comes back to the car with a coin in her hand and says, "I knew I saw a quarter on the sidewalk." Story 4. My brother was misbehaving, so my mom wanted to hit him with the slipper. I was in the bathroom pooping, so when I came out I was surprised no one was home. I looked out the window and saw my brother running across an empty field and my mom chasing him with the slipper in hand. Funniest sight I ever had. Story 5. She used to be the kind of person who would yell at retail and fast food employees. One time she freaked the screw out at a Blockbuster employee because she accidentally gave me the wrong game. I always checked to make sure we got the right one before we got home, so it really wasn't a big deal. Later, when she was telling my dad what happened, she lied and acted like she was the victim. Very uncool. I was only 10 and even I knew better than to act like that. Story 6. Mother's Day 11 years ago, my very petite mother decided to take my brother and I to Ross, local clothing store in a strip mall. We are pulling in and I guess she stayed at the stop sign a half a second too long, so the guy behind us lays on his horn and starts flipping her off. She responds by driving at a turtle's pace to make sure he was even more irritated until we actually pulled off to park. Instead of moving along and just being angry, the man decided to follow us into the parking spot and pull up so fast to my mom's door he almost hit it when she got out and started screaming in her face. Instead of being afraid, she went full psycho mode, pushed him backward and kicked 4 perfectly sized 6 boot-sized dents into the side of his car while screaming some of the craziest crap I've ever heard. After he fumbles his phone out to call the police, we peel out and head home. I did not get to go to Ross. Story 7. Oh, my mother. Love her to bits, but she definitely has shaped her own category of how to be a parent. First off, she works and has worked 60 to 70 hours a week my entire life. She loves her job, and that's why she's there so much. Wasn't really around the house, but when she was drinking Coke by the can and watching Forensic Files. Stopped using a babysitter for my younger brother and I when I turned 8. Set no house rules or curfews. Said, "Rules don't make men, mistakes do." Then sips her soda and watches her show, LOL. Story 8. When I was around 14, she went on a blind rampage calling us, myself and 2 brothers, ages 13 and 11, lying little crap, that no one would ever trust us and we'd get nowhere in life, that she hates living with us and she wishes she could pack up and leave like our father did. He left to escape her, and is still very much involved in our lives. Why? Someone ate the last biscuit in the packet and no one would own up to it. Story 9. A monkey entered my house through the back door and went straight into the kitchen. It started breaking things and throwing stuff around. My mom tried to shoo it away, but it wouldn't budge. So she took a stick to save herself in case it attacks and started shouting at it. The monkey started making these sounds trying to scare her. This went on for about 10 minutes. I guess the monkey got tired and it left, but I'll never forget the sight of my mom, who is usually kinda calm, trying to duel with the monkey. Story 10. When I was like 12 years old, my family made a trip to Croatia and we wanted to cross through Serbia. After like 5 hours of driving with the car, I really had to take a crap out in the middle of nowhere. But because of possible landmines still around after the war, my mum told me to stay at the car, while she makes a safe path to a place I can take a crap. It took me 5 years to realize that she had put herself in the serious danger of getting killed by a landmine just because I had to empty my bowels. Story 11. She fell for a Nigerian, Jamaican, lottery scam. After she had my dad thrown in jail, she was blocking the bedroom door where $2,000 in cash was, and he pushed her aside to get the money before she sent it to the scammers. We had an impromptu intervention. The scammers would call the house every 5 minutes. She lost about $6,000 to them. She would beg them on the phone to bring the lottery money because we didn't believe her. It was very sad. Story 12. When I was in 2nd grade, 1994, I went to Catholic school. I learned about other religions through TV and asked my mom if those other people who follow other religions would go to hell. She told me, "Honey, it doesn't matter what you believe in as long as you are kind to others." I was so stoked. I went to school and told my friends what she had said, and they all got super excited. Well, the news got around the school and I was called into Principal Sister Jean's office. She spanked me for spreading blasphemy. My mom was called to pick me up because I was acting hysterical afterwards. I'm sitting outside the nun's office watching my mom and her talk when suddenly my mom punched a nun in the face. Now my mom is a guidance counselor in a large high school in Genesee, Michigan. She's the nicest person I've ever met. I will never forget that moment. She came out yelling, "Go ahead and call the police," and we went and had Slurpees. A week later I started public school and my mom started her job as a teacher. Story 13. She sat down to play 2 hours of Tomb Raider on the PS1. No real reason besides just curiosity of what it was, and never want back to it. I got a lot of respect then, that a parent would take that much of an interest in their kids' hobbies. It doesn't take a lot of effort or time to get an idea, even if only small, of what younger generations are into. Not really that crazy, but still not something I would ever expect. Story 14. A few years ago my mom was going through the menopause and wasn't really feeling great about herself. My stepdad and I were trying to cheer her up and give her compliments, but it didn't seem to do much to help. One Saturday evening I was having dinner with them. There was a lot of wine involved, and we were discussing how my mom wasn't feeling very confident or beautiful anymore. I told her she needed to embrace who she is and that she should be proud of her body and her looks. She is truly the most beautiful woman I've ever known, and the next thing we know she has stepped outside into the back garden, taken her t-shirt and bra off and is streaking around the garden in a moment of madness. We live in an urban area, and our garden is overlooked by quite a few houses. She got her confidence back from that little outburst though, and the neighbors probably got quite a surprise. You do you, Mom. Story 15. Lived in an older house with glass doorknobs that can come loose, fall out, etc. when I was in high school. My sister was away at college and my dad and brother were at a basketball game out of town. Mother Dearest drank an entire bottle of Old Crow that afternoon and decided I was an ungrateful fat while I was upstairs doing my homework in my room and took the doorknob out, so I was locked in. I was locked in from 6 p.m. to 7 a.m. No dinner, no breakfast, no explanation other than the drunk screams through the door of being a fat ungrateful. Asterisk should note at this time I was maybe 100 pounds and a ballet dancer.